So we're going to start with a short reflection. It'll just take a moment, and I just want to invite everyone here to close your eyes, and I promise it'll just be for a moment. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to say a word. So keeping your eyes closed, please notice the first thing that you see or feel or think as I say this. Courage. And I'll say it again. Courage. And keeping your eyes closed, please just take a moment longer to reflect. What came up for you as you heard those words? And what didn't come up for you? And when you're ready, I'd like to invite you to open your eyes and type whatever it was that you noticed or didn't notice into the chat. Maybe just see if you can describe it with one or two words, seeing if you can describe a metaphor or an image, or whatever it was that most stood out for you. And in the meantime, I'm going to ask the panelists to introduce yourselves, and also, if you feel so inclined, to share your metaphors as well. Smita, do you want to start?
Thank you, Tracy. That a moment of pause really helps to connect with self. So thank you for that. I'm a coach and also work with Coacharya as director sales and administration. I was an ex-banker and shifted my roles, and now I am just loving the space of coaching, which is to do with individuals and also systemic, the team coaching work. So that's a small, brief introduction about myself. And what came up as a metaphor when I heard the word courage is a path, a road, so to say, which is not very smooth. It's curvy, it's bumpy, it's also smooth. And whenever I just go within to be tapping into finding for courage for myself, a quote by Rumi really comes up very strongly for me, which says, "As you walk the path appears." So with that, I would like to call Hetal to introduce.
Hey, thanks, Smita. For those who might not know me, Hetal here, 25 years in the industry, tech industry. Last 8 years being a startup evangelist. I'm also pursuing my PhD, and I'm a baby coach right now. Not yet got my ACC certification, but yeah, it's been an interesting journey to get to here, and look forward to interesting interaction with you guys on courage. My metaphor by default is marathon. Running marathons is something which has redefined my life, and I believe that I keep telling my fellow runners, showing up at the start line of a marathon, and by the way, I'm only referring to the races which is 42.2 kilometer long. Anything less than that is not considered marathon. So just showing up at the start line requires a lot of courage. And once you reach the start line, 99.9% people are guaranteed to reach the finish line. I mean, it's just, that's where the courage comes in, right? It's not about the state of mind or your physical body. It's your combination of the mind and body literally pushing you to the finish line. And I think anyone who's run a marathon would be able to understand what I'm trying to say. Thank you. Over to you, Tracy.
Thank you. I'm Tracy, and I'm a coach. I also work with Coacharya as a coach educator, teaching level 1 and level 2 programs, and I'm a mentor as well. I also am a mindfulness and meditation teacher. And my metaphor is the butterfly. That was the first image that came up for me. And when I explored it a little bit further, I was realizing that like the butterfly has so much fragility, right? It's beautiful, and yet it's so fragile. And yet it flutters around, it flies around. And then also in the butterfly, there's that knowledge of not just the beauty, but also where it came from, that butterfly transformed, and through that transformation, changed from something that wasn't maybe seen as classically beautiful into something that is. So there's this awareness, I think, with the butterfly of where it always came from, and also that it only has the present, right? It's just so it's so present in its fragility. So that's what came up for me. Hetal and Smita, I loved like there was some correlation between what you both shared, right? Like you were talking about the path, Smita, and then Hetal, you were talking about the marathon, and like just getting to the start line is the biggest part. And then I also just want to share some of what I am seeing in the chat. So freedom, churning, beating of the heart. So like, yeah, I love the idea of courage being in the heart space. Busy road, like I love that came up as we were. It's amazing to kind of see the collective awareness here. Quiet strength, like a sparrow. Explosion, showing up for new things, strength. So there's so many things here, and for the sake of time, I won't go through them all. One more, light at the end of the tunnel. But as we see these metaphors, whether it's our own metaphor that came up or the ones that have been shared by others, even some of the similarities between the two, I just want to invite you, the audience, to think about how they differ. How are these metaphors different from the way that courage is typically portrayed or understood? Well, like, I know that's a fairly general statement, but we get these ideas of what courage is through the media, through popular culture. So how does the metaphor that you came up for you, or that came up for others, how's it a bit different? And then panelists, I'm going to ask you, like, I think that sometimes the assumption about courage is that it's about action, right? And yet what I've been reflecting on and what we're talking about today is that it shifts the way that courage happens when the actions are driven more by expectations, especially external expectations, than by our values, by our integrity, by our heart. So I just want to invite you to talk about that a little bit. How can something that seems courageous actually be false courage when it's driven by external pressure versus the heart? Smita?
Yeah. In my awareness, it was always courage. And when you use this word, false courage, it really makes me to think that so many of the times, without our awareness, it is about that false courage. And we're talking about courage embodied today, and when I'm thinking of courage embodiment, it's really like a physical manifestation of our own the values and how they are fully integrated into how we show up in the world. And thinking about the false, courage, I want to share with all participants here. This comes up to me in three parts, like one about how do I, in a corporate setting, for example. So many of the times when, you speak up in meetings, not because you genuinely, you have a point to make, but you want to impress upon the other person. There is an external perception, external pressure for you to be perceived in a particular way. And similarly, when there is leadership and there is management, and you want to agree with the management because you want to appear supportive. So these are the two examples in the corporate setting. And when I think of relationships, right, many a times all of us would have seen those relationships where it's toxic, and though we would continue with that toxicity in that relationship, just because we don't want the societal judgment. We would still go ahead with compromising on appearing strong while suffering internally, maybe. And thinking about, the societal as a overall, like the social dynamics, when I think about that space, many times we do things to fit in. We want to fit into the group that we really like, and by for doing so, it's about a, just a, it's not courage. We make some choices and compromise on our personal values just to go along with that, that gossip or speaking badly about someone, because I want to be, good in the books of the person, and that, good in that grace of that group. So yeah, these are what comes up for me, Tracy, as I'm thinking of the false courage.
So Tracy, I wanted to answer the question which you directed to the audience, right? It's not just Smita and me, two people. I've done 40 episodes of my podcast, Courage Talks. The standard question to start with is, what's your definition of courage? And I can go on record, not a single person has said the same thing out of 40, right? That's just pure fact for you in terms of something so simple can have so many variations in terms of how the people pick it up. Before I answer, I want to just pick up the line which Vinita has mentioned in the chat. Courage is not absence of fear. And that's something which actually one of my guests said, right? Courage is doing the act despite the fear. You embrace the fear as a part of the act rather than saying it's alien to me. Takes me back to my MBA selection days when you used to have something called a group discussion. And in a group discussion, everyone used to be scared of this big mouth guy who's going to totally dominate the show and is going to like totally overrule everyone. And the default strategy, which most of the people used to say was, okay, ignore him, just don't look on his side. Let him keep talking. The better strategy was to acknowledge him, thank him, appreciate him. And this look on that guy's face when I said, thank you, so nice of you to say that, he did not say anything after that because he thought my job is done. And the discussion went so well after that, right? Okay, coming back to my story. I strongly believe courage is something which, when your heart's language speaks, is where the courage comes in. Right in the beginning of my corporate career, when I was working for Wipro, handling big sales assignments for Wipro in Japan, cracking big deals, I used to think getting a big deal is courage. I used to think talking up to my boss is courage. I used to think getting a good appraisal rating was courage. Later down in the line in my life, when I started the podcast, where I'm actually spending money on each episode, calling people and asking them to share stories of courage of their daily life, that's where I felt my true courage came in, because I was doing what my heart said. I believed there was a story which my father had to share, and that's why I wrote the book. I believe his story needs to continue and more other stories have to come out, and that's where the podcast came. So I think being honest to yourself and letting your heart language be your life is all courage.
Thank you. I really resonate with that, and I'm constantly evolving what my idea of courage is, but also what it isn't. And through some of my own experiences that I'll be vulnerable and share, where I realized that I've been falsely courageous. And I actually thought I was being really courageous at the time. And one of those instances where I was in a group, it was a large group of people, I can't remember, it was some event. And there was a lot of people there that were unknown to each other. And I went with a few of my friends, and there was someone just loud at the table talking, and he was using language that was slurring. It was homophobic. And a couple of my friends were queer. And so I was feeling very angry at the moment, and I felt like I needed to say something, and I stepped up and I did. I said something to the person in front of everyone. And I felt very good, like, oh, Tracy, that was the right thing to do. That was really courageous. And I realized it wasn't actually, because I was being motivated, A, from my anger, and B, from this idea of I will speak up. I will be the courageous one. And I never even asked my friends how they wanted to handle it. until that moment, they weren't known to the other person. That other person didn't know how he was harming them. And I removed the choice from my friends in terms of how they wanted to handle it so that I could be the hero. And part of that was motivated because in the past, there were times that I hadn't spoken up and I had regretted that. So when you speak about courage being a heart choice, I really resonate with that because it's also a choice. It's giving other people choice, right? And sometimes that can be the most courageous thing that we can do, that we honor other people's choices to do what they need to for themselves. The other way that I've realized that I've stood in false courage is when I don't ask for help. I won't go into all of the details, but there's been several times in my life where I have really needed to reach out and really needed help. And I haven't because I had this idea of like, I'm independent, I'm a survivor, I can do this. And it impacted me and the people around me. So sometimes I think as well, being courageous, when we tap into our hearts, we realize like not just what's good for me or good for someone else, but what's good for all of us. You know, what needs to happen from here. So we talked about how courage might begin with intention, right? It begins from the heart, but it doesn't end there. The ICF Code of Ethics urges us, I was going to say invites us, but urges us to consider the difference between doing good versus avoiding harm. And so I'll put this to the audience first. We'll just put this in the chat. What do you see as the difference between doing good versus avoiding harm? And then I'm going to ramp that up a little notch for the panelists and ask, when it comes to ethical courage, right? We're looking at that. How do we even know what good is?
Yeah. So defining that good is perhaps the most complex, human endeavors, where we know it might just involve cultural nuances and subjective moral frameworks. So it's very difficult to define what is good. However, when I am aligned to my own core values, maybe then I am operating more from the space of that awareness. So over the period of time, what I've really learned, what the good varies based on our personal values and our cultural backgrounds as well. So the best approach in tough situations is really about not always having a clear answer. Like as coaches, we always say that, being comfortable with that unknown, right? This really means to stay very humble and always that curiosity to learn more. The moment I rush to label things as good, bad, right, wrong, all of that, I'm just saying that I'm often missing on other perspectives. And for me, I feel real ethics really starts with accepting that uncertainty, right? Just embracing uncertainty. And so let me share, when you talked about avoiding harm and doing good, a recent experience, and I will take a moment to share that. In a startup where the management decided to go lean, and so now the responsibility of the team members is going to change because now the team is going lean. The manager knows that a particular team member is a high potential, right? Like is really a great performer. Now, announcing the change in the roles and responsibilities randomly in a meeting, knowing that, that might not be taken in a very positive way, right? Instead, so the harm is really about just being random about it and not being sensitive to be seeing how the team member or that employee will take this information. How about, just having a one-on-one conversation and give that autonomy to the employee to be saying that, certain things are changing in the overall system, and that would mean a shift in your role in this particular way. How do you feel about it? And then also providing a safety net to be saying that can we go about observing for 2-3 weeks or 2-3 months, whatever that might be, and seeing how that shifts, your own, how are you taking that work with this change? So the doing good could be the management just announces, a change of roles and saying that, okay, here you go with a hike in the salary. And the avoiding harm, I think is more critical, because it is about, it needs one to be more sensitive, right? And just going ahead with another example, thinking of, like feedback. At the moment we hear the word feedback, it's like, we don't take it very positively. Thinking of feedback, I just, have an example again from the corporate space to be saying that when we want to give a critical feedback to someone, it is a constructive, it is going to be helpful for the person, but we hold it, withhold it, because we think that, for that momentary discomfort that may cause for that other person. However, how about, delivering the feedback, but choosing the words carefully, doing it like more like a coach, where there is autonomy given to the person to buy in the point, and with a lot of compassion. So these are the two examples with which I feel that, avoiding harm and doing good is what comes up.
I'll pick up a couple of points from the chat again. I think it was Moshmi who mentioned vulnerability is courage. It's interesting because that's an integral part of my questions in my podcast, and I'm amazed so many times people don't have a. So I asked them, like, have you been vulnerable in public? Have you shed tears in public? And I'm surprised people who had like a 30-40 years life in public have never shed tear. And I'm like, what are you talking about courage, man? You can't be a public persona and not having gone through a situation where you had to display your emotion, then you did not, fearing shame, fearing guilt, fearing weakness, or whatever, right? The second point I want to pick up from chat was, it's very interesting, Vinita mentioned that sometimes whatever you fear, you might be forced to encounter in real life. And it's funny, like 20 minutes back, I was watching this web series where this female who was violently abused by her ex-husband, runs away from him, is at a small island working as a nurse, and she has to actually treat a patient who's had a sudden heart attack, and it turns out to be her ex. And that's where her entire baggage of ill will or hatred she had for this guy who had physically abused her for a year came to test. And she came out trumps because she administered her the treatment that was expected of her as a nurse. I mean, what can be a better example of courage than that, right? Getting back to ethics, I think from an ethical dilemma perspective, as an angel investor, I faced that multiple times. Should I be investing in something which is financially lucrative, or should I be looking at something which is a good for the society, good for the industry, or whatever, right? And you obviously find it very difficult to draw the balance, because invariably the latter is not the former, right? If you're looking at something more from a largeness or from a social good perspective, it's not likely to be a financially lucrative solution, at least in the short run. In the long run, things might work out, right? I mean, we face this ethical dilemma always, all the time, right? Should I do what is right, or should I do what is good? I mean, if we're able to come to an answer on that, I think it will solve a lot of our problems. But yeah, I mean, in the short run, and of course, going back, I mean, I'm glad that my career foundation was built in an organization called Wipro, with a founder called Azim Premji, who had driven the importance of ethics in the organization so clearly that every new joinee by default knew what ethics meant. And I mean, that's 25 years, and the lessons remain with me. So I think being ethical is a huge act of courage. I would want to finally cite one more thing, which is typically associated with culture, right? And they say in a company culture is what you do when nobody's looking, right? Courage is what you do when nobody asks you to do something, right? What comes naturally to you, that's courage.
Beautifully put. I think I struggle with this question daily. Like, what is good? How do we know what it is? When I was researching this, I was reflecting, like, the villain, like the hero in one story is going to be the villain in another story, right? Like, we all have different perspectives, and we all have different perspectives of what is right and what is good. And I'm even reading from the chat, doing good is with the intent of moving forward. And that's absolutely true. And that's what you were saying, like, but every choice that we make is going to have a consequence. Every choice that we make, even just the act of walking, we might be stepping on something, right? And that's not our intent. So I think for me, I always have to stay in the I don't know. I actually don't know what good is. And the moment that I think I know what good is, then I might actually be doing harm, right? And even when it comes to the most outrageous acts, I have to remember, like, I don't know what the motivation behind them was. I don't know how this person justified it to themselves. We all justify things to ourselves. And I have to recognize that I will never know until I understand every single perspective in this world, not just humans, of any being that has any level of awareness. I'm actually never really going to know what's good. So then it just comes back to, yeah, making the choices that seem to come from the heart that are not serving to self-protect. And I think that's why when I read the ICF, doing good versus avoiding harm, I think the avoiding harm is really important here, because when we're avoiding harm, we're protecting ourselves, we're protecting our egos, we're protecting our kind, you know? And that's when we make those choices that actually inflict harm. So yeah, I mean, we could have a, yes.
Sorry, didn't want to interrupt you.
No, please go ahead.
Vinita has, said in the chat, we can't avoid harm all the time. It is probably personal and perception driven. I think that's so true. And that definitely comes from, we can't really define what good is.
Yeah.
And you know what? I mean, we are doing, unknowingly, we are harming someone all the time, right? I've kept my phone on silent mode, on flight mode. I might be avoiding someone reaching out to me who might be in a state of emergency. I'm harming him by not picking up his call or not allowing him to reach. We are consuming microbes. We are killing microbes every second as we breathe, right? So I think if we want to avoid being deeply spiritual, I think we should understand the fact that we can only do what we think is okay at that moment, whether it's good or harm, only time will tell.
Oh. Hi. Can you hear me? I think I just lost internet for a second.
Oh yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, amazing. Whew, my heart. Yeah, I think the acknowledgement that everything we do is going to come with some harm involved is actually maybe one of the more courageous acts that we can take. Okay, so we've talked about how doing good kind of means coming back to the heart. But then let's look at this in action, right? Like, what about how we actively do good versus avoiding harm? And I just want to float an idea out there, and then I'm going to share like a little parable. But I'll put this in the chat first. What if true courage is to love what's hard to love? So let me just post that. And then I'll share a parable that really struck me. I was researching this, and I found a parable by Jack Kornfield. He's a meditation teacher. I don't think it's originally from him, but he talks about a poison tree. And this tree has, it's very dangerous to anyone to even touch. And so there's some people out there, they see the danger and they say, cut that tree down, right? Cut that tree down before it can harm anyone. And maybe on the surface, this appears courageous, but then we're harming the tree. And then other people might say, don't cut the tree down. No, let's build a fence. And that is definitely more of a compassionate stance, but it creates distance, right? It creates separation. And then there's a third person that says, a third type of person that says, oh, perfect, a poison tree, how fascinating, just what I was looking for. And then that person studies the tree and learns from the tree, and then takes the poison and transforms it into medicine. And that's what Jack Kornfield calls true courage. And so, panelists, I wanted to float this out there and just invite some conversation on how the ICF Code of Ethics speaks not only to our work in the coaching space, right, but also to how we engage in daily life. Our ethical responsibilities don't end when we close the Zoom. So when we're outside of the coaching space, what does it mean to actually take in what's poisonous, learn from it, and transform it into something that might promote healing?
I think, the coaching mindset and the 4 beautiful words out there really come up for me strong and loud, which is being open and curious, flexible and client-centered. As coaches, I think as we get to learn and have these different conversations, understand different perceptions, the value system of different people, what we are really doing is expanding our own capacity to hold complexity, right? And to be both grounded in our values. There may be conversations where we come across those conversations where we see that value mismatch. So, but in the conversation, when we hear the other, how about seeing that maybe in their worldview, what they're going through and what they're sharing is true for them. So while being grounded in my own value, how can I still be open to evolution? And the mindset of a coach is not just limited to the space of coaching, but about being being flexible and open to every human being, every conversation that comes our way. Just think of you land up in a conversation with your spouse or a friend where they had a rough day, and for whatever you said, what all you're getting is some kind of a reaction, right? So the response, our response to that reaction, if it is reaction, it's just going to collide. But then when as coaches, what we really master that art is the moment of that pause, which helps us to shift from being reactive to being responsive. And when I say this, Tracy, you and I, we've gone through this journey together, and often we've discussed about this quote from Viktor Frankl. I know you are as much as a fan as I am about between stimulus and response, there is a space, and in that space lies our freedom and our power to choose our response. And in that response lies our growth and our freedom. I think this quote is so true for us as not just as coaches, not just in coaching conversations, but in general in life, as to how do we, and I think this pause really makes us to be more curious, to be more humble, to be always wanting to learn more than what we already know. So yeah.
No, I think I resonate with the points which you mentioned, but if I look back on examples, how often have we come across the scenario where an acerbic boss was getting angry, not because of we doing something wrong, because he was not happy at home? How often have we seen a parent abusing his child because he was abused in childhood himself? And if we take everything on face value, we would just assume X number of things are bad and X number of things are good, not realizing that there is a good behind the bad. And if we don't let that good come out, it will remain bad. But if we allow that good to come out once, it's transformed for life, right? So that pause that you mentioned, Smita, is not just between two instances, it's between life, it's in life, right? The more instances where you give time to everything, everything heals. Wherever you don't give time, nothing heals, right? Patience is so undermined as an important virtue. Take the bamboo example, right? I mean, it doesn't grow for what, 15 years and suddenly it shoots up and grows to 60 feet. I think that analogy could be applied to everything in life. You're running 5K, 10K won't do anything. You need to run a marathon. You need to run for 42 kilometers to really see what running is. You want to paint, 2 or 3 canvases is not going to make a difference. It's when you have spent multiple years practicing the art is where you might probably start getting slightly better than your child, right? And that's where the whole thing comes in, right? If you give time, things will prosper, right? A flower takes its own sweet time to grow, right? You can't expect it to bloom overnight, regardless of whatever you do. Give manure, give sunlight, give water. It's just not gonna grow overnight. You need to give that time, right? So I think to address the point, loving the unlovable, there's nobody who's unlovable. It's all, everyone is lovable at one point of time. You need to let that time come.
It has me reflecting on that old adage, time heals all wounds, right?
Yeah,
And
it
that's
does.
really true. I mean, if we let it. And sometimes what I'll say to myself in the moment is like, how much is this really going to matter a year from now? And that helps me move past whatever it is that I need to move past. And yeah, everyone's lovable to someone. I mean, I don't think I'm the first person to say this. It's fairly well known that even Hitler, who did such horrible, horrible things, was a dog lover. So if no one else loved him, his dog did, right? There's something about every one of us that's lovable. And at one point in our lives, we were good. And if we were once good, that goodness is still there somewhere. And I remember listening to someone talk about how even the most seemingly evil person, if the only compassion that we can find for this person is that they have no one in their life that calls them out on the acts that they're taking, then maybe that's the compassion that we have. So I feel like one of the ways that as coaches, we need to hold responsibility. We've been trained how to listen, right? We've been trained how to listen in a way no one else has. Even the other listening professions, like therapists, they listen, yes, and they have a sort of a vital role, but they listen to diagnose, right? They listen to prescribe. And we as coaches listen with no agenda other than listening for the good in other people. Really, when it comes down to it. But it doesn't end when we come out of Zoom. And while I can, some in a coaching session, I'm able to open up and really listen without feeling threatened by what the other person's saying. I find it so hard in another setting where someone's point of view is so conflicting or so hurtful to maybe the people that I love. But what that person needs, like you said, Hetal, a few moments ago about that person that just needed to be acknowledged in the meeting, right? And then their behavior changed. What we all need is to be able to listen to one another. So we as coaches, I'm just more and more present with the fact that our responsibility is to be able to give people the space in every facet of our life to truly share and know that they're being seen and heard, even if we do nothing else. So,
Before you
we
jump
talked
into the
about,
point which Vinita mentioned about if the wounds don't heal, then you might want to accept them as scar, right? Before the artificial leg was invented, someone who had a leg cut off had to live limp all his life. Now he does not. Before the vaccine for typhoid came, millions of kids used to die because of typhoid. Now they don't. So if you give time, maybe a miracle will happen and you might actually find a solution which you might have given up on, right? So it's all patience. Sorry. Tracy, please go ahead.
I'm really glad you brought it back to patience, because I think that patience, we've done some reading around like courage being the first virtue, and possibly it is, but patience is probably the second one, right? We have to do something courageously, but then we also have to recognize that that act we may never see the consequences of. Maybe those consequences come years in the future. Maybe they never come in our lifetimes. But we have to have the patience to know that in time, if we keep making choices that come from the heart, they will manifest. So yeah, thank you for that. Perseverance, I like that as well as an idea. So we talked about like loving what's difficult to love outside of us, but what if what we see out there often reflects what's inside us. So consider, what if that poison tree, if we take that same metaphor and consider it as something within us, how can loving what is hard to love be a courageous act that we offer ourselves? And I want to just invite the panelists to share, like, if courage means facing and accepting our poison trees, or let's say like our shadow selves, why might that be the only way that we can actually show up courageously with other people?
Yeah, it's like, while this process of coaching is all about we learning some structured way for the other person, but it all starts with self. And I think it's time for some vulnerability out there, Tracy, as you asked that question. For years, I've labeled myself definitely as an introvert, and viewing that as something with limitation, right? In my worldview, quite a nature always represented the shadow side of myself, something which I always felt that I need to overcome. Especially, when in a professional setup, extroversion is rewarded, right? People are appreciated who are extroverts. What I didn't realize was how this simple categorization was actually, I was creating my own prison, so to say. And by defining myself with so much rigidity, I was kind of avoiding deeper truths about the multidimensional nature. In the space of, while I was learning the art to coach the other, and we know that a lot of the time, and most of the times, it starts with self coaching. What I really became aware of, that fixing my introversion is not the solution, but what really it is about is embracing it, acknowledging that it can be, both as a gift and as a challenge. But when it is about gifts, I was thinking, what is happening by being an introvert? Um, I could understand, I could really get into, deeper listening. So as an introvert, because I'm talking less, therefore I'm listening more, right? So, and there is a lot of meaningful connections. So rather than putting my focus on saying that, okay, what should be the next thing I should say here, really embracing to be saying that what positive side of this introversion is giving me. So again, Carl Rogers, the quote on curious paradox is that when I accept myself as I am is only when I can change. How beautiful is that? So for all of us here in the audience listening, what is it that you would like to become aware of yourself, which, we've been thinking of it as a shadow, and pushing it away, rather than what does it need for us to reframe to embrace it, if at all you're really wanting to work on self. So I think when I stopped really categorizing myself so rigidly is, like I said, right, like the genuine presence with others improved, the listening really improved, not to not to respond, but really listen from that space of, the generative listening, as they say. And the journey really taught me that true courage with others is impossible without, first having that courage to face myself completely. I think when we embrace our, the full humanity, we create that space for others to do the same.
So to your point about being introvert, Smita, I'm not too sure, but you might have read the book Quiet. Beautiful book by Susan Cain, which talks about introverts. She spent, 15 years researching the topic. And sometimes we tend to onboard a label to us. We don't realize that label can actually be an asset rather than being a liability, right? When I read Quiet, I realized introverts are much smarter than extroverts because they allow more time for listening. And we all know we have 2 ears and 1 mouth, right? So why should introvert be something which you should look down upon or which should correct? People who know me would be surprised. I was a very shy child as a child in my childhood days. I would hardly speak. Even now, I'm more of a listener than a speaker, but when I get a chance, I don't lose out on that. Coming back to one of the points Vineeta mentioned, I think all my questions of courage talks are easy, one by one getting exposed. She says risk taking is courage. I love this beautiful quote which Dad left behind in his diary. Not taking a risk is a risk too. And if you're not taking risk in life, you're not experienced life, honestly. I mean, living is risk, right? Surviving is risk. It's so easy to just take a poison pill and die, right? The fact that you chose to wake up one more day to go through another 24 hours, you're taking a risk. Anything can happen to you. Your spouse might be cheating on you, your kid might ditch you. You're taking so many risks just by surviving and breathing. You might be breathing toxic air if you're in North India. You're actually taking a risk of killing your lungs much faster than what you want to, right? So risk is always there. If you start recognizing the number of risks which you're already taking, when life throws a risk at you, a risky situation to you, you laugh and say, "This is nothing. I can laugh through it," right? On the aspect of loving the unlovable, we tend to be judgmental, and that's the biggest challenge. I mean, for me as a coach, it's the biggest challenge is to not judge my coachee. The biggest challenge as a podcaster is to not judge my guest. Okay, he is there for a purpose. He did this for a purpose. It's not my job to pass on opinions, or of course I can, bring up a follow-up question on what he shares, but to be able to hold on to your emotions, to hold on to your actions and let the entire story unfold, you realize things are so different rather than you having barge in. And there comes my big challenge, right? And that's something which it's a constant challenge, but I'm loving it. I'm enjoying it. I embrace it as a big deal, and I triumph myself when I'm actually able to hold my horses and not speak up, as Tracy knows.
One of the practices that I notice myself judging people. I mean, I think many of us would be lying to ourselves if we didn't own the fact that judgment happens, right? It's part of our survival brain. So even if we can turn it off for points of time in coaching, it's gonna come up in other areas. One of the practices that I try to do when I notice myself coming to some judgment of another person is to look at it and say, okay, what within me is this triggering? Because chances are, if I'm judging another person that, for their greed, there's something about what they have that I don't, that's triggering that judgment. Or if I'm judging another person for being opinionated, maybe there's something that I wish that I was doing that I'm seeing in them. And so I need to question myself whenever I notice a pattern, particularly of judgments coming up. What is it that I'm not owning within? And then coming back to what Smita said, the curious paradox is only by accepting ourselves can we change. So only by me being okay with the parts of myself that aren't so lovable, with the judgmental, with the opinionated, with the unhappy, with the sometimes hateful parts of me, to be able to just stay in love with them and say, okay, this is, this is part of who I am. And this has come from my history and also my ancestors and the world around me. And this represents the world out there. And so the only way that I can show up with love with the world out there is if I can also share that with myself. And I make it sound like it's easy, but it's not. It's a very difficult practice. But yeah, that's one of the ways that I try to evaluate my judgments. And I, again, coming back to anything that is difficult, that's where the courage comes in, right? The courage to actually face these things. Before we move towards closing, there's something that I want to offer. Everything that we've been saying, I also recognize that within myself, there's times that I do stay quiet and I say, oh, I'm being compassionate. But then when I'm being honest, I think maybe I'm just actually holding back in that moment when I actually do need to move forward, when I actually do need to act. And so I'm going to put this out there to everyone and then maybe just ask each of the panelists to reflect on this before we close. But when the heart's calling you towards something difficult, what helps you move from intention into action?
Very beautiful question, Tracy. And so thinking from my heart space, as when my heart called me towards this difficult journey, so to say, when when that awareness is there of staying with my previous example of this being an introvert and transcending from that rigid identity as an introvert. I found myself in that similar, familiar space, so to say, between knowing, like there is this knowing about the being an introvert, and that definitely called for me to do some doing, right? Only when that doing would happen would I be able to work on myself to move from where I am to where I want to go. And it's a very tender, I would say, like a threshold where intention would definitely need some like resistance. There'll be some pullback when you want to move from something which you're very used to, so for something, for the new to be welcomed, right? What really helped me to make this transition or to bridge this gap between what I have become aware to what I want to be, and these are two Sanskrit words which I have actually grown up listening to from my parents and grandparents, which is about um, abhyasa and vairagya. So abhyasa is all about that committed practice of things. So when I have become aware of the change that I want for myself, the intentionality that I put for practicing, and that about the vairagya is about that non-attachment. So the Bhagavad Gita teaches all of, it's all about the crux of this is you keep doing your job without expecting the outcome from it in a particular way. So how do I and I think these are the two strong actions, I would say, that I have taken to kind of bridge that knowing and doing. It's not easy. It's still not easy, right? It's not that I'm totally have overcome, but I'm just becoming aware that it's a journey. It's a work in progress, and something that the non-attachment, I think, is as a practice has really helped me to embrace it with a lot of compassion. Marrying these two principles of the dedicated practice and the non-attachment, I think that is something which is helped in the transformation and to bridge this gap of the knowing and the doing. So yeah, I think when the heart calls towards something difficult, now I remember these two as my go-to. And there is this sacred partnership of this persistence. And I think Vinita used that word, right? Persistence and patience, and then to surrender, to be saying that, okay, if this has not worked, maybe it's time to not do anything, but time to change the way that it has to be done. So the outcome, if it is not as per what I wish to, then it's for me to now change the path and take another action, because the abhyasa has to be consistently done. It cannot be once done, once failed, 10 times done, 10 times failed, and then you let go. It can be 100 times done and 100 times failed, 1,000 times done and 1,000 times. I don't know how many times, but it has to be like a constant effort.
So, few things. The first thing is, thanks a lot for quoting the Bhagavad Gita, Smita, and of course, it's a rich text with a lot of stuff. The first thing I want to share is taking courage to move from intention to action. Again, I go back to my podcast, right? I mean, when I scripted it out, I was assuming that people have stories of courage. I was assuming that people having had a successful career will have a lot of instances of courage, and honestly, first few episodes were really painful. Not to ask them to narrate their life story, and yet ask them to indicate the instances where they experience courage. Imagine calling Sanjeev Bikhchandani on a podcast, speaking for an hour and not mentioning Naukri.com, his biggest baby, right? Because the whole idea was not his accomplishments. The whole idea was his thought process behind it. Now, everyone is not as evolved. They really are not able to narrate themselves. They're not able to explain themselves. And I feel sorry for such individuals, and that's okay, right? I mean, you all will reach a point where you will, but if you are, imagine what you could do, right? And I would like to cite the wording which Tracy quotes a lot, nihilism, right? Nothing. Imagine there's nothing inside you. You can do anything, right? The entire hurdle and handicaps which prevent us from doing something is because we think we are something. And it's not necessarily a more of a, oh, I'm God types. Even the negative part is where you are actually creating a persona of yourself, which will not allow you to do that particular action. What if that persona is not there? What if you're zero? You have nothing to lose. What if you don't have a precedent of that act in your mind? It's easy, right? Why do you get scared of touching fire? Because you have seen someone touching fire and screaming. What if you have never seen anyone touch fire and scream? You will touch fire. How can people walk on charcoal? That's where the explanation comes. There's nothing around me. I don't care what Tracy thinks. I don't care what the audience thinks. I'm going to talk what I want. That's where the real me will come. Because I will be talking what my heart says. I'll be talking intuitively. I'll be talking what comes to my mind. I'll be talking from subconscious, and the voice of subconscious is voice of divine. It's proven multiple times over in the Eastern and the Western literature as well, right? Finishing line. It does not take courage to be courageous. Because if that was the case, nobody would perform a courageous act in their lives. It's only after the courageous act is performed then, so, oh, he's so courageous. We didn't know. You never gave him a chance. You have onboarded him with life's fears. You onboarded him with your fears. You have given him labels. You have passed judgments. You have created certain examples all around you. I mean, it takes courage not to be on a WhatsApp chat and communicate in India today when everyone is saying, let's do this to Pakistan and let's do this. It takes courage to be quiet at times. So I'll go quiet. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm conscious of time, so I'll keep this brief, but what you said, Hetal, about nothing. Yeah, we enter this world with nothing and we leave it with nothing. And I think that will sometimes, that's what I need to call on and to remember. The only thing that I'm going to leave in this world is my legacy. And my legacy will be the way that I showed up for other people, for the people that'll remember me. And so when I need to call on my courage, I have to think about sometimes, like, what if this is the last thing that I ever do, right? Or also, like, what will I want to remember about this moment? And one last thing that I'll share about what you said about courage isn't something that we have. The etymology, I never know if I'm saying that word, right? From courage is heart. It's from the word kur, which is the word for heart. So if we have hearts, we have courage. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.
Happy courageous living.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.